I stopped pushing my cart the second I saw the jacket. Not her face first, the jacket. Faded navy blue. A small tear near the left cuff that had been stitched crooked by someone who clearly wasn't good with a needle, and a collar that had gone soft and gray from more washes than any piece of clothing should survive. I would have known that jacket blindfolded. I would have known it in a crowd of 10,000 people. Because I was the one who stitched that cuff. I was 12 years old when I did it, sitting on my bedroom floor with dental floss because I didn't know where my mom kept the actual thread, and I was doing it for a girl who had ripped her sleeve climbing over my back fence to avoid her father seeing her come home late. My name is Miles Sanderson. I'm 33 years old, and I run a hardware store on Kessler Avenue that used to belong to my father before it belonged to me. And before that Saturday afternoon in the cereal aisle of a grocery store I'd been shopping at for 11 years without incident, I would have told you my life was simple, predictable, not boring. I don't love that word. Just settled into a shape I understood. Open the shop at 7. Close it at 6. Have dinner with my sister every other Sunday. Water the plant on the counter that I keep forgetting is fake. That was my life, right up until I turned down the cereal aisle and saw a woman standing there in my old jacket, reading the back of a granola box like it had personally wronged her. I hadn't seen Aubrey Kent in 19 years. I want to be clear about something before I keep going, because I know how these stories usually sound when somebody starts them this way. This wasn't a romance from the beginning. It wasn't some slow-burn crush I'd been carrying since middle school, waiting patiently for the universe to hand her back to me in a grocery store like a prize I'd earned through good behavior. Aubrey Kent and I were kids together. We were best friends the way only two 11-year-olds who live on the same street and have nothing better to do can be best friends, which is to say completely, loudly, and without any sense that it might not last forever. And then it didn't last forever. Her family moved away the summer before 8th grade, and I never saw her again. Not once. Not at a reunion. Not through mutual friends. Not on any of the social media platforms where people supposedly find each other now. She simply stopped existing in my life the way a lot of childhood things stop existing, quietly, without ceremony, until one day you realize you haven't thought about them in years, and then you feel guilty for that, and then you stop feeling guilty too. So when I saw her standing in the cereal aisle wearing a jacket I made with dental floss when I was 12 years old, my brain did not immediately supply her name. My brain just froze on the jacket, the way you freeze when you see something that shouldn't be possible, like a photograph of yourself in someone else's house. Then she looked up, and I knew. Not because her face hadn't changed. It had, the roundness of childhood gone, replaced by the sharper lines of an adult woman with tired eyes and a ponytail that had mostly given up by 4 in the afternoon. I knew because of the way she looked at me. That specific double take, the kind where somebody's expression goes from polite stranger neutrality to something cracking open in half a second. Miles, she said, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it. Aubrey. I said it slower, like I was testing whether the name still fit her, whether saying it out loud might make the whole thing dissolve. It didn't dissolve. She was still standing there. Still real. Still wearing my jacket. For a second, neither of us moved. Two grown adults standing in a cereal aisle under fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill, just staring at each other like we'd both seen a ghost, and were trying to figure out if the ghost could see us back. Somewhere behind us a cartwheel squeaked. A kid whined about wanting the cereal with the cartoon tiger on the box, and none of it registered. The whole store had narrowed down to the 6 feet of linoleum between us. "You're wearing my jacket," I said, because apparently that was the most important fact available to me in that moment. More important than 19 years, more important than how are you, more important than everything. Aubrey looked down at herself like she'd forgotten what she had on. Her hand came up and touched the collar automatically, the way you touch something you've touched 10,000 times without thinking about it. "I know," she said quietly. "I know I still have it. You still have it. I never gave it back." I noticed. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. There was something underneath it, something that sounded more like relief than amusement, The kind of exhale that happens when a person's been holding something in for longer than they meant to. You stitched that cuff with dental floss, she said. I remember because it itched for a week and I never told you. You never told me a lot of things apparently, since you disappeared with my jacket for 2 decades. That got the real laugh out of her, short and surprised, like she hadn't expected to be capable of it in a grocery store on a Saturday. It wasn't on purpose, she said. I mean, it was at first. I meant to give it back. And then we moved, and then it just became mine, I guess. It smelled like your house for years. Your mom's laundry detergent. I used to sleep in it when I was homesick for a place I couldn't even name. I didn't know what to do with that sentence. It landed somewhere in my chest and just sat there, heavy and unfamiliar, like a piece of furniture someone had delivered to the wrong address, but I didn't have the heart to send back. We stood there a while longer, ignoring the cart between us, ignoring the woman who had to awkwardly maneuver around us to get to the oatmeal, ignoring everything except the fact that the last time we'd stood this close to each other, we'd been children saying goodbye in a driveway with a moving truck idling behind her, and neither of us had known it was the last time. I have to ask, she said finally, glancing at my cart. Are you the same Miles who used to insist every sandwich needed to be cut diagonally or it, and I quote, tasted wrong? That's a scientifically supported opinion, and I stand by it. You were an insufferable 11-year-old. You threw rocks at my window at midnight because you were convinced we were being visited by aliens. Those were fossils, Miles. They were gravel, Aubrey. Actual gravel from your own driveway. She pressed a hand over her mouth, laughing now, and something in my chest unclenched that I hadn't even realized was clenched. I want to back up here, because I think you need to understand what Aubrey Kent meant to me before any of this makes sense. We met when we were 7. Her family moved into the house 2 doors down from mine, and within a week she'd shown up at my back fence holding a shoebox full of rocks she was convinced were fossils, demanding I help her identify them using an encyclopedia my parents kept in the garage for reasons nobody could explain. I don't think a single rock in that box was actually a fossil. I don't think that mattered to either of us. We spent the next 6 years inseparable in the specific, complete way children are inseparable before the world teaches them to be embarrassed about needing people. We built forts out of couch cushions that took entire Saturdays to construct and about 90 seconds to destroy. We got in trouble for climbing the water tower behind the elementary school, a crime that earned us a joint phone call home and a shared punishment of raking both our families' yards for a month, which honestly just meant more time together, so neither of us minded much. We had a running argument about whether ketchup belonged on eggs that lasted, unresolved, for years, an argument that somehow survived longer than most actual relationships I've had as an adult. She broke her arm trying to prove she could do a cartwheel off my porch steps, and I carried her books for 6 weeks afterward like some kind of medieval squire, and neither of us thought that was strange because we were 11 and 11-year-olds don't know yet that boys and girls being close friends is supposed to require an explanation. Her home life wasn't good. I understood that even as a kid, in the vague way children understand things adults try to hide. Her father drank, and when he drank, the house got loud, and Aubrey got quiet in a way that scared me more than any yelling could have. She used to climb over my back fence some nights, jacket catching on the wood, and sit on my porch steps until she felt steady enough to go home. I never told my parents. I don't fully know why, except that it felt like something she'd trusted me with. An 11-year-old me understood trust well enough to protect it even without understanding much else. Sometimes she wouldn't say a word for 20 minutes, just sat there hugging her knees, and I'd sit next to her doing the same thing. Not because I knew what to say, but because I understood. Somehow, that saying nothing was sometimes the kindest option available. The night she ripped the jacket, she'd come over crying, though she wouldn't say why beyond mumbling something about her dad and a broken lamp. I didn't ask more. I just found the sewing kit my mom used for buttons, sat with her on my bedroom floor, and fixed the tear as best I could with whatever thread I could find, which turned out to be dental floss because 12-year-old boys are not known for their access to proper sewing supplies. Aubrey laughed at the crooked stitches even through her tears. Told me I'd make a terrible tailor. I told her it would hold, and it did, for 19 years apparently, stitched into a jacket she never gave back and never stopped wearing. Then, the summer before 8th grade, her father got transferred for work, or maybe that's just what her mother told people. I never knew the full truth. I just knew there was a moving truck one Tuesday morning, and Aubrey standing in her driveway with red eyes, and a hug that neither of us knew how to end, because neither of us understood yet that some goodbyes are actually permanent. She promised to write. She promised to call. Neither of us had phones of our own yet. An email felt like something for adults, and somewhere in the disorganized chaos of being 13, the promise dissolved the way most childhood promises do, not through betrayal, just through distance and time, and the simple fact that new lives grow over old ones like grass over a foundation. I hadn't thought about Aubrey Kent in years. That's the honest truth, and it used to embarrass me a little when I did think about it. The fact that someone who mattered so much for 6 years of my life could become someone I simply forgot to remember. But standing in that cereal aisle, watching her touch the collar of a jacket I'd stitched with dental floss when I was 12 years old, none of those years apart felt real anymore. It felt like we'd just been interrupted mid-conversation and were finally getting back to it. "Do you have time for coffee?" I asked, before I could talk myself into something more careful and less honest. Aubrey glanced at her cart, half full of the kind of groceries that suggested someone who cooked for more than just herself, then back at me. Something flickered across her face, quick enough that I almost missed it. Hesitation, maybe, or calculation. The look of someone doing quiet math about a schedule, or a person, or a permission she wasn't sure she had. "Yeah," she said finally. "Yeah, I have time." We left our carts with the world's most confused stock boy and walked to the little coffee shop attached to the grocery store strip mall, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that hadn't been updated since spring. We sat by the window. She ordered a caramel latte, same as she used to beg her mom for from the gas station machine when we were kids, and I found that unbearably funny for reasons I couldn't fully explain, and she laughed when I told her why. And for a solid 20 minutes we didn't talk about anything except memories. The water tower. The fossil rocks. A teacher we'd both hated in 5th grade who used to confiscate notes and read them out loud, which had taught us both, at age 10, the art of writing in code. "Do you remember Mrs. Halloran's face?" Aubrey said, wrapping both hands around her mug, when she read that note out loud in front of the whole class, and it just said, "Meet me at the fence." Code read, "Bring snacks?" She thought we were planning a heist. We were planning a heist. It was a very small heist involving your neighbor's plum tree. That tree owed us nothing, and we stole from it anyway. We were criminals, Miles. Ruthless, snack-driven criminals. Then, carefully, the conversation drifted toward the 19 years in between, the way conversations eventually have to. She told me she'd become a physical therapist, worked at a clinic across town that specialized in sports injuries. She told me her parents had divorced eventually, unsurprisingly, and that her father had gotten sober around the time she turned 20, which she said with the complicated tone of someone who was glad but not entirely healed by it. She told me she'd lived in 3 different states before settling back here 2 years ago, which was strange to hear, that she'd been in the same city as me for 2 years and our paths had simply never crossed until a Saturday afternoon and a box of granola. "What about you?" she asked. "Still fixing things with dental floss. Only when the situation calls for it." She smiled at that, but it faded quicker than I expected, replaced by something more careful. "You're not wearing a ring," she said, glancing at my hand like she was confirming a fact rather than asking a question. "No," I said. "Not currently in the market." "You?" She looked down at her own hand, and that's when I saw it. A ring. Not enormous, not flashy, but unmistakably an engagement ring, sitting there on her finger like something I should have noticed the second we sat down, except I hadn't, because I'd been too busy looking at her face and the jacket and trying to reconstruct 19 years in 20 minutes. "Oh," I said. "Real smooth. Real articulate." "Yeah," she said, and there was something in her voice that didn't match what an engaged woman's voice is supposed to sound like when she confirms she's engaged. Something flatter. Something careful in a way that made my chest tighten without my permission. "Congratulations," I said, because that's the thing you say, even when your body is doing something complicated and unhelpful in response to the news. "Thanks." She turned the ring once around her finger, an absent gesture, the kind people do without noticing. "His name's Wesley. We've been together 2 years. What's he like?" She paused. It was a small pause, barely noticeable, the kind of pause that would mean nothing for most people. But this was Aubrey Kent, the girl who used to answer every question I ever asked her instantly, without editing, without filtering, because that was the entire point of us, that neither of us had ever needed to filter anything for the other. "He's successful," she said finally. "Ambitious. Good at making plans." That was not an answer to the question I'd asked. I noticed it, and something in her face told me she knew I'd noticed it too. "That wasn't really what I asked," I said gently. She looked at me for a long moment, and something behind her eyes seemed to be doing arithmetic, weighing whether this conversation was safe, whether 19 years and one accidental grocery store reunion had earned her enough trust to say something true. Then she looked back down at her coffee. "He's fine, Miles," she said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. "Can we talk about something else?" I let it go. I want you to know that I let it go, because I understood even then that pushing on a bruise nobody's admitted to having isn't kindness. It's just curiosity wearing kindness as a disguise. So we talked about other things. The hardware store, her clinic, a dog she'd adopted last year named Biscuit who apparently hated the mailman with a fury disproportionate to any actual offense. By the time we finished our coffee, 90 minutes had disappeared without either of us noticing. The way time only disappears with people who used to be able to make hours vanish just by existing near you. "This was really good," she said as we stood to leave, gathering her bag, glancing once more at the jacket like she was suddenly self-conscious about it. "I should probably explain why I kept it." "It's not. I don't know. It's not weird. I just—" "Aubrey," I said, "you don't have to explain a jacket to me." She smiled, small and grateful. "I'm glad I ran into you." "Me too." We exchanged numbers before she left, the way adults do now instead of promises whispered in driveways. And I stood in the parking lot for a full minute after her car pulled away, feeling 19 years compressed down into something that fit in my chest like it had never actually left. That Sunday, at dinner with my sister, Renee, I made the mistake of mentioning it casually, the way you mention something you're pretending not to think about. "Wait," Renee said, setting down her fork with the theatrical precision of someone who had just been handed gossip. "Aubrey Kent, the fossil girl? They were rocks, Renee. Everyone agrees they were rocks. You cried for a week when she moved. I was 13. You cried for a week, Miles, and then you didn't talk about her again for 19 years. And now you're telling me you had coffee with her for 90 minutes and forgot to eat your sandwich." "I ate my sandwich." "You didn't touch your sandwich. I can see it in your face that you didn't touch your sandwich." She leaned forward, suddenly more serious. "Is she okay? You've got to look. She's engaged." That's not what I asked. I didn't have a good answer for that, not one I was ready to say out loud yet. So I changed the subject, and Renee let me, though she gave me the kind of look that told me she'd be bringing it up again soon. "I want to tell you I was smart about what happened next. I want to tell you I respected the ring on her finger and kept things appropriately distant, the way a decent person is supposed to when reconnecting with an engaged childhood friend. Mostly I did. We texted. Small things at first, memories that surfaced randomly. A photo of the water tower she found still standing when she drove past our old neighborhood. A joke about ketchup on eggs that resurrected our old argument like no time had passed at all. Then we started meeting for coffee every couple of weeks, always daylight hours, always careful, always framed as old friends catching up, because that's exactly what it was supposed to be. Except every time we met, I noticed something small. The way she'd glance at her phone more than seemed necessary, checking it even when it hadn't buzzed. The way certain topics made her go quiet in that same careful way she had that first day at the coffee shop. The way she always paid in cash, and once, when I asked why, she said something about Wesley liking to review the joint account statements. Said it so casually that it took me a full 10 seconds to register how strange that sentence actually was. The way she'd sometimes start a sentence about her own opinion on a movie, a restaurant, a color she liked, and then quietly walk it back, as though she'd caught herself doing something risky. I didn't say anything. Not yet. It wasn't my business, I told myself. People have all kinds of arrangements, all kinds of relationships that work in ways I don't understand from the outside. I told myself that a lot. Actually, over those next 6 weeks, every time some small detail landed wrong in my chest, and I chose to swallow it instead of asking. Then came the night she called me at 11:30, her voice tight in a way I'd never heard from her, not even as a kid hiding from her father's temper. "Miles," she said, "can I come over? I don't really have anywhere else to go right now." I didn't ask questions on the phone. I just gave her my address, even though some small formal part of my brain knew she probably had it already, from childhood, from a street 2 doors down that neither of us had lived on in 19 years, but that somehow still lived in both of us. She showed up 20 minutes later in sweatpants and a jacket, mascara smudged under one eye in a way that told me she'd been crying and trying not to at the same time, which is its own particular kind of exhausting. I let her in without asking anything. Made tea because that's what I knew how to do when the world came apart. Boil water, find mugs, keep my hands busy so my face didn't have to do anything complicated while I waited for her to be ready. She sat on my couch, knees pulled up, hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only warm thing in the room. "We had a fight," she said eventually. "Wesley and I." "About what?" "You." She said it plainly, without drama, which somehow made it worse. He saw a text thread. "Not even anything, Miles. Just us talking about the water tower." And he went through my whole phone. Every message for the past 2 months. Then he told me I needed to explain myself, like I'd done something, like talking to an old friend was some kind of confession he was owed. Something cold settled in my stomach. Is this the first time something like that's happened? She didn't answer right away, which was its own kind of answer. He's not a bad person," she said finally, in the exact defensive tone people use when they're trying to convince themselves as much as anyone else. He worries. He grew up with a lot of instability. His parents' marriage fell apart because his dad cheated, and I think he gets scared." "Aubrey." I said her name carefully. "Does he go through your phone often?" She looked down at her tea. "Sometimes." "Does he tell you who you can and can't talk to?" "It's not like that." "What's it like?" She didn't answer that one either, and the silence that followed told me more than any explanation could have. I thought about the cash payments. I thought about the careful pauses whenever his name came up. I thought about how, in 19 years of not knowing this woman, and 6 weeks of getting to know her again, I had never once heard her laugh the way she used to laugh as a kid, loud and unguarded, except in the moments when she seemed to forget, briefly, that someone else's opinion of her was supposed to matter more than her own instincts. "I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life," I said carefully, "but I remember who you were before any of this. And I don't think that girl would have accepted someone reading her messages like she was a suspect in her own relationship." Aubrey's eyes filled, but she blinked hard, the way people do when they've trained themselves not to cry in front of certain people, and it hurt to realize I might be one of the people she'd learned that reflex for. "It's complicated," she said. "We're supposed to get married in 5 months. Everything's already planned. My mom keeps telling everyone. His family's already treating me like part of theirs. If I just walk away because of one fight." "Is it one fight?" She stopped. The question sat in the room between us, heavier than either of us wanted it to be. "No," she admitted finally, so quietly I almost missed it. "It's not one fight." I didn't push further that night. I just sat with her while she finished her tea, let her fall asleep on my couch somewhere around 1 in the morning, and covered her with a blanket before going to bed myself, feeling like I'd stepped into something much larger than a grocery store reunion, something I didn't fully have a map for yet. The next few weeks were a strange, quiet unraveling. Aubrey didn't leave Wesley immediately. People rarely do, no matter how clear the outside world can see the shape of what's wrong. Instead, small things kept surfacing. She mentioned once, almost offhand, that he'd stopped her from taking a promotion at the clinic because it would mean longer hours and, in his words, less time for us. She mentioned that her friend group had quietly shrunk over the past 2 years, not through any dramatic falling out, just a slow erosion of plans that got vetoed, invitations that got discouraged, friendships that got starved of oxygen until they simply stopped breathing. She mentioned, once, almost as a joke that didn't land, that Wesley had a spreadsheet tracking their monthly expenses that she wasn't allowed to edit, only view, and I remember sitting very still when she said it, trying not to let my face show what I was thinking. Every time she told me something like that, I felt a very specific kind of anger, quiet and controlled, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, because loud anger isn't useful to anyone in that moment. I never told her what to do. I want that on record, because it would have been easy, so easy, to use those weeks to pull her toward me, to point out every flaw in Wesley's behavior and let the math do the rest. But I understood something important, something I'd learned watching my own mother navigate a bad marriage before my parents eventually divorced when I was 16. People don't leave because someone else convinces them to. They leave when they finally trust their own eyes enough to admit what they've been seeing all along. So instead, I just kept being the person I'd always been to her. I listened. I made tea. I laughed at her jokes about Biscuit hating the mailman. I let her borrow books from the shop's little lending shelf and never once mentioned the ring, never once asked when the wedding was getting closer, never once made her feel like our friendship came with a hidden invoice. Then, on a Tuesday evening in early October, she showed up at the store 15 minutes before closing, still in her scrubs from the clinic, hair falling out of its ponytail, eyes red-rimmed, but steady in a way I hadn't seen from her yet. I ended it, she said, before I could even say hello. I called off the wedding. I set down the box of hinges I'd been organizing. Are you okay? I don't know yet. She let out a breath that shook a little on the way out. He said a lot of things. That I was throwing away something good. That I'd regret it. That no one else would put up with. And then he stopped himself, which honestly told me everything I needed to know. Put up with what? Exactly, she said. He didn't even know how to finish the sentence in a way that didn't sound insane out loud. I came around the counter and hugged her before either of us could overthink it, and she held on longer than a friendly hug usually lasts, her face pressed into my shoulder, breathing slow and careful, like she was trying to remember how to do it without an audience judging the rhythm. I gave the ring back, she said into my shoulder. It felt like giving back a costume. How do you feel? She pulled back enough to look at me, eyes still wet, but something lighter moving underneath the exhaustion. Lighter, she said, terrified, but lighter. I want to tell you that we kissed right there in the hardware store surrounded by hinges and paint samples, that the whole thing wrapped up neatly into a movie moment. But that's not how real timelines work, and I think you deserve the honest version more than the tidy one. We didn't kiss that night. She needed space. Real space, to figure out who she was outside of 2 years spent shrinking herself to fit inside someone else's comfort. I gave her that space without complaint, because I'd learned by then that loving someone sometimes looks like waiting quietly on the sidelines instead of rushing the field the second an opening appears. We kept talking, though. Slower now, more careful, the way people talk when they both know something is shifting, but neither wants to name it too soon and scare it away. She moved into a small apartment near the clinic, decorated it herself for the first time in years without asking anyone's opinion first, she told me, with something like wonder in her voice, like that fact alone was its own small miracle. She painted one wall a deep forest green that Wesley would have called too dark for resale value, and she told me about it laughing, like she was daring the old version of her own thoughts to object and finding, happily, that they didn't. She started running again, something she'd loved as a teenager and abandoned somewhere in the last 2 years without ever quite noticing the loss until she picked it back up. She reconnected with two old friends Wesley had quietly frozen out of her life. And the first time she came back from coffee with them, she looked 10 years younger, like something heavy had finally been set down after being carried too long without complaint. 3 months after the grocery store, on a cold evening in January, she showed up at my place with a bag of takeout, and, for the first time since we were kids, no reason at all except that she wanted to. "I have a confession," she said, setting the bags on my counter. "Should I sit down?" "Maybe." She smiled, but there was nervousness underneath it, the kind I recognized because I'd been feeling a version of it myself for months. "I kept the jacket because it made me feel like myself." "Does that sound strange?" "No," I said carefully. "Why?" She looked down at herself, at the jacket she still had on, the same one, stitched cuff and all. "Because when I was 13 and we moved, I felt like I was losing the only place I'd ever actually felt like myself. And this jacket smelled like your house, like safety, like somebody who never made me feel like I had to earn being liked. I used to put it on during bad nights with Wesley, actually, before I even understood why it helped. I just knew it did." Something in my chest cracked open at that, gentle and unstoppable, like ice finally giving way to water underneath. "Aubrey," I said, "I think I've been in love with you since I was 11 years old and didn't have a word for it yet." She looked up at me, eyes bright, breath caught somewhere between a laugh and something more fragile. "That's a very long time to wait to say something." I had good reason. "You disappeared with my jacket for 19 years. That got the laugh out of her, real and unguarded. The exact laugh I remembered from childhood, loud and a little too big for the room. And I realized in that moment I hadn't heard it once, not fully, not like that, since she'd walked back into my life. Wesley had taken that laugh from her somewhere along the way, quietly, the way people take things without ever announcing the theft. And now, standing in my kitchen with takeout going cold on the counter, she'd gotten it back. "For what it's worth," she said, stepping closer, "I think some part of me has been in love with you the whole time, too. I just didn't let myself look at it directly. It felt too big, too permanent, easier to bury it under other people who asked less of me. And now, she said, I think I'm done pretending the center of my life is somewhere else." I kissed her then, finally, 19 years in one grocery store and one accidental confession later, and it felt less like the beginning of something new and more like finally finishing a sentence we'd started as kids and never gotten to complete. We didn't rush anything after that, which I think is worth saying out loud, because I know how these stories usually get told, fast and dramatic, weeks compressed into a single triumphant montage. The truth is slower and, I think, better for it. We dated properly for the first time in our lives, treating each new memory with the kind of care people only learn after they've watched something precious slip away once already. We went back to the water tower one weekend, just to see if it still stood the way she remembered, and it did, rusted and smaller than either of us recalled, the way childhood landmarks always shrink once you're tall enough to see them clearly. We stood underneath it for a long time, not climbing this time, just looking up, and Aubrey said it felt like visiting a version of herself she'd almost lost track of, and I told her I was glad that version had finally found her way back. Her father, sober 11 years now, walked her down the aisle a year and a half later in a small ceremony behind my parents' old house, the same backyard where she used to climb over the fence in a jacket that would eventually end up stitched with dental floss by a 12-year-old boy who had no idea he was doing something that would matter for the rest of his life. She wore the jacket under her dress for the ceremony, just for a few minutes, just long enough for a photo, because some things deserve to be present even when they're technically out of place. My mother cried through the whole thing, mostly, she claimed, because she'd apparently predicted this outcome back when we were 11 and nobody had believed her. Wesley, as far as I know, moved to another city about a year later. Aubrey heard through mutual acquaintances that he got engaged again fairly quickly to someone else, and I won't pretend either of us spent much time thinking about him after that first year. Because grief for a relationship you're relieved to be free of tends to fade fast once real happiness moves in to take up the space. These days, the jacket hangs on a hook by our front door, next to mine, worn soft in exactly the places you'd expect after decades of use. Sometimes I catch her wearing it on cold mornings, coffee in hand, standing at the window the way she used to stand on my porch steps as a kid, steadying herself before facing whatever the day required. I never mention it. I don't need to. Some things you just let exist quietly, the way you let a scar exist without pointing at it, because the story underneath it is already understood by everyone who matters. We still argue about ketchup on eggs, for the record. Neither of us has budged an inch in over 20 years, and I don't expect either of us ever will, because some arguments aren't really about the thing they claim to be about. Some arguments are just an excuse to stay close to someone, to keep the conversation running long after the actual disagreement stopped mattering. Renee still brings up the fossil rocks every single Sunday dinner, without fail, like it's a family tradition now, and Aubrey has taken to bringing an actual rock to dinner sometimes just to hand to her deadpan and say, for the collection. I think about that Saturday in the grocery store a lot, the granola box, the fluorescent lighting, the specific ordinary luck of turning down one aisle instead of another and finding 19 years standing there waiting, patient as anything, in a jacket I'd almost forgotten I ever made. So tell me, would you have recognized someone after 19 years, just from something as small as a jacket? And have you ever run into someone from your past who ended up changing the whole direction of your life, just by showing up in the wrong aisle at the right time? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.